Why does she let them push her face into the dirt? That's the question no one asked. They saw weakness. They saw someone who didn't belong. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see. But what they couldn't see, what they would never see until it was too late, was the truth hiding behind those empty eyes. The morning sun hammered down on Fort Drayson like a punishment. 42 recruits stood frozen in formation, their bodies rigid, their minds exhausted. Day 27. That's how long they'd survived. Out of 100 candidates who started this special operations selection course, only these remained. The others had quit, or broken, or simply disappeared in the night, unable to face another morning of brutality disguised as training. She stood in the back row, small, unremarkable, hidden behind the broad shoulders of men who looked like they were carved from granite. Her brown hair was pulled back tight. Her uniform hung loose on her frame. Her posture was just slightly off, not quite right, not quite confident. Everything about her screamed outsider. Her name was Eloyne, and everyone knew she wouldn't last another week. Sergeant Thaddeus Blackwell paced before them like a predator selecting prey. His combat boots kicked up small clouds of dust with each deliberate step. His face was weathered, hardened by tour in places most civilians would never pronounce correctly. His expression settled naturally into contempt. It was the face he wore most comfortably. His eyes landed on Eloyne. She felt his gaze but didn't react. She'd learned long ago that reactions only fed men like him, so she stood still, breathing steady, eyes forward, waiting. "Attention," Blackwell barked. They were already at attention, ramrod straight, unmoving. But he said it anyway because the command wasn't about posture, it was about power. It was about reminding them who controlled their world. Eloyne struggled slightly with her posture, just enough to be noticed, just enough to confirm what they all believed about her. The night navigation exercise had ended only 4 hours ago. The other recruits had been given accurate coordinates. They'd found their way back to base tired but successful. Eloyne's map had been marked wrong, intentionally. She'd been sent through terrain that tested her limits, through darkness that swallowed sound, through hours of wondering if this was the test that would finally break her. She'd made it back eventually, dirty, exhausted, late. Exactly as planned. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Captain Silas Merrick watching from the sidelines. His presence was unusual. Officers of his rank didn't typically observe at this stage of training. But there he stood, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the formation like he was looking for something specific. "Recruit Keir," Blackwell's voice cut through the morning heat. "Step forward." Eloyne moved, not too quickly, not too confidently. She walked with the deliberate awkwardness of someone who'd never quite fit into military precision. She stopped in front of him and waited. "Tell me, recruit," Blackwell circled her slowly, "why do you think you belong here?" The other recruits held their breath. They'd witnessed this routine before, with other targets, with other victims. They knew how it ended. "To serve my country, Sergeant," Eloyne replied. Her voice was steady but quiet, the kind of voice that was easy to talk over. Blackwell laughed, sharp, cold, devoid of anything resembling humor. "Your country," he stepped closer. "And you think the best way to serve is by slowing down an elite unit, by demanding special treatment." "I haven't asked for special treatment, Sergeant." "Your presence demands it," Blackwell shouted, his face inches from hers. "Every time we have to slow down for you to catch up, every time we lower our standards to accommodate weakness." The other recruits stayed silent. Relief washed over their faces. Someone else was the target today, not them. They could breathe easier knowing that Blackwell's attention was focused elsewhere. Eloyne's eyes gave away nothing, fixed forward, deliberately empty. "This isn't some equality experiment, people," Blackwell addressed the formation now, using Eloyne as his teaching prop. "In combat, the enemy doesn't care about your feelings. They don't care about diversity quotas. They care about exploiting weakness." He jabbed a finger toward Aloin. And weakness gets good men killed. Captain Merrick made a note on his clipboard. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes tracked every micro-movement, every slight shift in body language that the others missed. As Blackwell continued his tirade, Aloin's mind flashed briefly to another time, another place, a younger version of herself standing in shadows, watching men in uniform speak in hushed tones, a hand placing a medal in a wooden box, whispered conversations in languages few Americans could understand. She returned to the present as Blackwell announced the day's training. Close quarters combat. The perfect arena for public humiliation. The afternoon sun had climbed to its peak by the time the recruits gathered in the combat training yard. They paired off naturally, their unofficial hierarchy long established. The strong with the strong, the survivors with the survivors. No one volunteered to partner with Aloin. She stood alone, isolated, exactly where she needed to be. "Recruit Lachlan," Blackwell called. Xavier Lachlan stepped forward, former college wrestling champion, shoulders like boulders, a perpetual sneer that suggested he enjoyed this part of training more than he should. He'd been watching Aloin for weeks, waiting for his opportunity. Today was his day. "You'll be demonstrating with Recruit Kier," Blackwell announced. The other pairs spread across the yard, creating a wide circle around Aloin and Xavier, conspicuously isolated, on display. "Today we're practicing takedowns and control holds," Blackwell explained. He demonstrated the technique on a willing recruit, explaining proper form, safety protocols, the mechanics of safely putting an opponent on the ground. Then he turned to Aloin and Xavier. "Don't worry," Blackwell announced loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Women get special treatment in my course." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Lachlan, you may use maximum force. Kier, your job is simple. Survive for 30 seconds. Captain Merrick stepped closer. His interest was evident now. Something about this moment had his full attention. The first takedown was brutal. Xavier drove Aloin into the ground with unnecessary force. She hit with a dull thud that echoed across the yard. Air rushed from her lungs. Following training protocol, she slapped the ground to disperse impact. It did little to soften the blow. She got to her feet without complaint, without reaction. She resumed her starting position and waited. Xavier glanced at Blackwell, who nodded for him to continue. The second takedown was worse. Xavier swept her legs and drove her down with his full weight. Blood trickled from Aloin's lip. The metallic taste filled her mouth, but her eyes remained calm, calculating. Something about that gaze made Xavier hesitate momentarily. "Problem, Recruit Lachlan," Blackwell barked. "No, Sergeant," Xavier replied quickly, resuming his position. Captain Merrick's eyes narrowed. He'd caught a micro-expression on Aloin's face, something that didn't match her submissive posture. It was gone in an instant, but it troubled him because he recognized it. "Enough playing," Blackwell stepped into the circle. "Let me demonstrate a proper takedown." The recruits gathered around, their training forgotten. They anticipated the spectacle. This was entertainment now. This was the moment when someone learned their place. Aloin stood calmly, waiting. "Sometimes trash needs to know its place," Blackwell said loudly enough for everyone to hear. He grabbed Aloin roughly by the collar and shoulder, driving her face into the dirt with unnecessary force. The yard filled with uncomfortable laughter as he pressed his knee into her back, grinding her face deeper into the earth. This is what it felt like to be invisible. This is what it felt like to be dismissed. This is what it felt like to let them believe they'd won. "This is what happens in the real world," Blackwell lectured, still pressing her down. "No second chances, no mercy." His words cut off abruptly. Aloin's body changed beneath his grip. The shift was subtle at first. fingers twitching in a pattern that Captain Merrick recognized with sudden alarm. "Sergeant," Merrick shouted, "stand down." But it was too late. With liquid precision, Aloyne transformed beneath Blackwell's hold. Her movement was serpentine, fluid. Years of expert training revealed itself in one explosive moment. She twisted from beneath him, capturing his extended arm, using his momentum against him with devastating efficiency. Within 2 seconds, she had Blackwell in a neck hold. Her small frame was now perfectly balanced, perfectly leveraged, the physics of combat suddenly working in her favor. The sergeant struggled, then gasped as Aloyne applied targeted pressure to his carotid artery. His face reddened, then paled as she cut off his blood flow with clinical precision. Dead silence engulfed the yard. The recruits stood frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. The woman they dismissed as weak was now controlling one of the most feared instructors on base with terrifying efficiency. Aloyne released Blackwell just before he lost consciousness, letting him collapse to his knees, gasping for air. Her eyes, no longer vacant, scanned the yard with predatory awareness. Captain Merrick stepped forward, speaking clearly in a language none of the recruits understood. "Nightshade protocol verified. Status report." Aloyne responded with perfect accent. "Asset secure. Evaluation complete." Merrick immediately stood at attention and saluted her. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembled recruits. What had they just witnessed? The confusion in that training yard was nothing compared to what came next. Blackwell remained on his knees, coughing, humiliated, but something deeper than humiliation crossed his face when he finally looked up at Aloyne. It was recognition, the kind that comes when you realize you've been playing checkers while someone else was playing chess. General Helena Valor arrived within the hour. She didn't run, didn't rush. Commanders of her rank never did, but her presence changed the atmosphere immediately. The recruits had been dismissed to barracks, left to whisper among themselves about what they'd seen, about what it meant. Blackwell was escorted to a private office, not arrested, not punished, simply removed from view. Aloyne stood in that same office now, her posture completely different, no longer the awkward recruit. Her spine was straight, her gaze was direct. She'd shed the mask she'd worn for 27 days. General Valor studied her with the kind of look that suggested she'd known this moment was coming. "Major Keir," the general said quietly, "was the demonstration necessary?" "It was inevitable," Aloyne replied. "Men like Blackwell escalate. The question was never if but when, and whether the right people were watching when it happened." Valor glanced at Captain Merrick, who nodded confirmation. "He crossed every line," Merrick said, "deliberately sabotaged her navigation equipment, encouraged excessive force during training. The neck hold was assault, not instruction." "And you got it all on record?" Valor asked. "Every second," Merrick confirmed. Aloyne hadn't come to Fort Drayson to become a special operator. She already was one, decorated, experienced, trusted with missions most soldiers would never know existed. She'd come here for a different purpose entirely: to expose a system that confused cruelty with strength. "How many others?" Valor asked. "Across 8 facilities, we've identified 47 instructors who display similar patterns," Aloyne reported. "Blackwell was among the worst, but he's not unique." The general walked to the window. Outside, recruits were returning to evening formation, going through their routines, unaware that their world was about to shift. "You understand what you're asking for," Valor said. "This isn't just about removing bad instructors. You're challenging an entire culture." "Yes, ma'am. There will be resistance, powerful resistance. Officers who believe that breaking people is how you forge warriors." "I know." Valor turned back to face her. "And you still want to proceed." Aloyne thought about every recruit who'd quit because they couldn't endure the humiliation. Every talented candidate lost not to the demands of training, but to the cruelty of instructors who mistook abuse for leadership. Every young soldier who learned that might makes right, that the powerful can humiliate the weak with impunity. Yes, ma'am, I want to proceed. The general nodded slowly. Then we moved to phase 2. What none of the recruits knew, what Blackwell himself hadn't known, was that this entire selection course had been a test, but not the test they thought. Some of them were being evaluated for special operations. That was true. But 3 of them were being evaluated for something else entirely. Over the next 2 days, those 3 would receive private summons. Tahira Chen, Dario Costas, Farron Osai. They'd been watching Aloin too, not with mockery, not with dismissal. They'd watched with something different in their eyes. Curiosity. Tahira had helped Aloin with her pack after a ruck march when no one else was looking. A small gesture, easily missed, but Aloin had noticed. Dario had questioned Blackwell once, quietly, about the modified map coordinates. He'd been punished for it with extra duty, but he'd asked the question anyway. Farron had simply refused to laugh. When Blackwell made Aloin his target for ridicule, when the others joined in uncomfortable laughter, Farron had stayed silent. It was a small act of resistance, but resistance nonetheless. These 3 were being watched by other eyes, evaluated by different criteria. The military needed operators. That was always true, but it needed something more. It needed people who could recognize abuse of power, who could stand firm against institutional pressure, who understood that real strength wasn't about dominating others. It needed witnesses who would become guardians. Tahira was the first to arrive at the small office where Aloin waited. The young woman entered cautiously, unsure why she'd been summoned. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Aloin sitting behind the desk in Major's insignia. "Sit down," Aloin said gently. Tahira sat, waiting. "Do you know why you're here?" "No, ma'am." "You helped me during the 12-mile ruck march. Why?" Tahira hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Because it was the right thing to do." "You knew it might earn you punishment from Blackwell." "Yes, ma'am." "But you did it anyway." "Yes, ma'am." Aloin leaned forward. "What did you think when you saw me put Blackwell in that hold?" Tahira considered her answer carefully. I thought maybe I hadn't been seeing clearly, that maybe I'd been looking at everything wrong." "Explain." "I joined the military believing in a certain kind of strength," Tahira said slowly. "The kind that's loud, aggressive, dominant, but watching you these past weeks, especially that moment in the yard, you were strong the entire time. We just couldn't see it." Aloin smiled slightly. "What else did you notice?" "That Captain Merrick was always watching, that the navigation coordinates were wrong deliberately, that everything about this course felt designed to break you specifically." Tahira paused. "It was a test, but not the one we thought." "And if I told you there was another test coming, one that would require you to spend years embedded in units where abuse of power is normalized, where you'd have to document wrongdoing while pretending to be part of the system?" Tahira's eyes sharpened with understanding. "I'd ask when I start." When Dario arrived an hour later, he was less surprised. He'd already put pieces together. The way Merrick had been documenting everything. The way Aloin's mistakes were too perfectly timed. The way the entire scenario had the feeling of theater. "Your intelligence," he said as soon as he saw her uniform. "This whole thing was an operation." "Not just intelligence," Aloin corrected. "This is something new. We're building a program to identify and remove toxic leadership from special operations, but we can't do it from the outside. We need people on the inside, people who can blend in, document, report." "Spies," Dario said bluntly. "Guardians," Aloin corrected. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Spies serve their own interests or their agency's interests. Guardians serve the people who can't protect themselves, the recruits who get broken unnecessarily, the young soldiers who learn that cruelty is leadership, the future operators who either become abusers themselves or quit because they can't stomach what they see. Dario was quiet for a long moment. This is dangerous if we're discovered. If you're discovered, you'll be labeled troublemakers at best, traitors at worst. Your careers will be destroyed, possibly your freedom. Aloyne didn't sugarcoat it. That's why I'm asking, not ordering. This has to be a choice. I'm in, Dario said without hesitation. Farron was the last to arrive, the quietest of the three. When Aloyne explained the program, Farron listened without interruption, processing, considering. Why me? Farron finally asked. I never helped you, never spoke up. You never joined in, Aloyne replied. That takes its own kind of courage. The pressure to conform, to laugh along, to participate in cruelty because everyone else is doing it, that pressure is immense. You resisted it. I couldn't, it felt wrong. That instinct is exactly what we need. The ability to recognize wrong even when it's wrapped in tradition, even when it's defended as necessary, even when everyone around you says it's normal. Farron nodded slowly. My father was military. He told me once that the hardest thing about service wasn't facing the enemy. It was watching your own people do things that made you ashamed to wear the uniform. Wise man. He killed himself, Farron said quietly. After he reported misconduct in his unit and was punished for it. They called him disloyal, broke him administratively. He couldn't live with being labeled a traitor for trying to do the right thing. The office fell silent. I'm sorry, Aloyne said genuinely. Don't be, Farron met her eyes. Just tell me this program will actually change things, that my father's experience won't keep happening to others. I can't promise that, Aloyne admitted. Change is slow, resistance will be fierce, we might fail. But we might succeed. Yes, we might succeed. Then I'm in. Over the following weeks, these three underwent training unlike anything in the standard military curriculum. They learned to observe without being noticed, to document without leaving traces, to maintain cover even under extreme pressure. They studied the psychology of toxic leadership, the patterns of institutional abuse, the ways organizations protect wrongdoers. But more importantly, they learned judgment. Because the hardest part wasn't identifying obvious abuse. It was navigating the gray areas, distinguishing between tough but fair leadership and genuine toxicity, knowing when to intervene and when to wait, understanding that not every hard instructor was a bad instructor, that difficulty itself wasn't abuse. You'll encounter commanders who push people to their limits, Aloyne explained during one session, who demand excellence and accept nothing less, who make training genuinely hard. That's not what we're targeting. Then what are we targeting? Tahira asked. Humiliation for its own sake. Punishment that's arbitrary or personal. Leaders who enjoy breaking people. The ones who confuse cruelty with toughness, who think degradation builds character, who use their power to settle personal scores or stroke their own egos. How do we tell the difference? Dario asked. Purpose, Aloyne replied. A tough instructor pushes you toward a goal. They're hard on you because the mission demands it. An abusive instructor pushes you to satisfy themselves. They're hard on you because they enjoy it. She pulled up case files, real examples, some clear-cut, others ambiguous. This is Commander Pierce. She showed them footage of a grueling training exercise. He's demanding, uncompromising. By traditional standards, he's tough as hell, but watch his face when recruits fail. They watched. Pierce's expression showed disappointment, frustration, but also something else, determination to help them improve. Now watch this. Aloyne showed them footage of another instructor, similar exercise, similar difficulty. This is Captain Rourke. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. When recruits failed, Rourke's expression showed satisfaction, almost pleasure. "You see it?" Aloin asked. They nodded. "That's what you're learning to recognize. The difference between someone who's hard because the mission demands it and someone who's hard because they like watching people suffer." But the training went deeper than observation. They practiced ethical reasoning, worked through scenarios where the right course of action wasn't clear, learned to sit with ambiguity and still make principled decisions. "You'll be in situations where you can't consult anyone," Captain Merrick explained, "where you'll have hours, maybe minutes, to decide whether to report something, whether to intervene, whether to risk your cover." "How do we decide?" Farron asked. "By returning to first principles," Merrick replied. "Is someone being harmed? Is the harm necessary for legitimate training purposes? Could the same training goal be achieved without the harm? Is this developing better operators or just satisfying someone's ego?" They practiced these decisions in simulation after simulation, each scenario calibrated to be genuinely difficult, some with clear answers, many without. "There's no formula," Aloin admitted. "You'll have to trust your judgment. That's why we're spending so much time developing it." The final phase of training took them to a remote facility where Aloin shared something more personal. She brought them to a small memorial tucked in the woods, a simple stone with a name and dates. "My father," she explained, "also military, also someone who recognized abuse of power." The three stood quietly, respectfully. "He taught me something crucial," Aloin continued, "that the strongest position is sometimes on your knees in the dirt, that being underestimated is an advantage, that patience is a weapon." "Is that why you let Blackwell think he'd won?" Tahira asked. "Partly, but also because I needed him to reveal himself completely. If I'd resisted earlier, he might have backed off, been more careful. But by appearing weak, I gave him permission to show his true nature. And Captain Merrick was watching, recording, documenting every violation." "So you sacrificed yourself," Dario said. "I used myself," Aloin corrected. "There's a difference. Sacrifice implies loss without purpose. I had a purpose. Every moment of humiliation was data, evidence, proof." Farron looked at the memorial stone. "Your father, did he do the same?" "In his own way. He spent years documenting corruption in his unit, quietly, carefully. He built an airtight case, and when he finally reported it, the evidence was so overwhelming that the entire command structure had to respond." "They still punished him for it," Farron said softly. "Yes, because even when the evidence is undeniable, institutions protect themselves. People in power resist accountability. Change threatens their position." Aloin paused. "But the investigation he triggered led to reforms, new oversight mechanisms, better reporting channels. He didn't live to see it, but it happened." She turned to face all three of them. "That's what you're signing up for. The possibility that you'll do everything right and still pay a price. That you'll succeed in your mission but fail to be recognized for it. That you might be punished for doing the right thing." "And you think we can handle that?" Tahira asked. "I think you already have," Aloin replied. "You've each already made choices that went against the group. That risked your standing. You helped when you shouldn't have. Questioned when it was easier to stay silent. Refused to laugh when everyone else did. Those were smaller versions of what's ahead." The next day, they graduated from the program in a small, private ceremony. General Valor pinned their qualification badges personally, then handed each of them sealed orders. "You're being deployed separately," the general explained. "Different units, different theaters. On paper, you're simply newly qualified operators. In reality, you're the vanguard of the most important reform in special operations history." After the ceremony, Aloin met with each privately. Tahira was heading to the Pacific Theater, a unit that had been flagged for concerning patterns but nothing concrete enough to warrant official investigation. Dario was assigned to a European team. Smaller issues there, but a commander who'd been the subject of informal complaints. Farron was staying stateside, joining a unit currently under quiet scrutiny, the riskiest assignment because oversight would be closest. Remember, Aloyne told each of them, your first job is to blend in, become part of the team, earn trust. Only then can you see what really happens when no one thinks they're being watched. And if we see something that requires immediate action, Tahira asked. Use judgment. Some things can't wait for perfect documentation. If someone's in immediate danger, protecting them takes priority over everything else. But those situations should be rare. Most of what you'll encounter will be slower burning. Cultural patterns, accepted behaviors, things that happen over time. As they prepared to leave, Farron voiced what they were all thinking. What if we fail? Aloyne had been expecting this question. Define failure, she said. What if we can't document enough? What if our reports don't lead to change? What if toxic leaders stay in place despite everything we do? Those aren't failures, Aloyne replied. Those are obstacles. The only true failure would be staying silent when you witness wrongdoing. The only true failure would be becoming part of the system you're trying to change. The only true failure would be letting them convince you that cruelty is strength. She paused. Remember that moment in the training yard, when Blackwell had me face down in the dirt, when everyone was certain of their power. That moment exists in every toxic environment you'll encounter. Your job isn't to prevent those moments. It's to ensure they have consequences. 3 months later, Aloyne received her own new assignment. Colonel Marcus Wraith's 7th Special Operations Group. If Blackwell had been bad, Wraith was legendary. Not in the good way. He'd built an entire command structure around the belief that softness was weakness, that comfort bred failure, that the only way to forge real warriors was through systematic degradation. His methods produced results, that was undeniable. His units had impressive operational records, low failure rates, high mission success. But they also had something else. The highest dropout rate in special operations, the most frequent reports of mental health issues among graduates, a culture where newer operators hazed recruits with the same cruelty they'd endured, perpetuating the cycle. Wraith didn't just allow toxic behavior, he institutionalized it. And now Aloyne was walking directly into his headquarters. She'd requested the assignment herself. General Valor had tried to talk her out of it. He'll be watching for plants, the general warned. He knows the reform program exists. He considers it a personal threat. Good, Aloyne replied. Let him watch. You'll have no backup, no immediate support if something goes wrong. Then I'll handle it the same way I handled Blackwell. This is different. Blackwell was one abusive instructor at a training facility. Wraith commands an entire operational group. He has allies, resources, political protection. All the more reason someone needs to be there. Valor had eventually agreed, but with conditions. Aloyne would check in weekly through secure channels. Any sign of compromise, she'd be extracted immediately. No heroics. Aloyne had accepted the conditions. Now she stood outside Wraith's office, waiting to report for duty. The door opened. Colonel Wraith looked exactly like his reputation suggested. Late 40s, scarred face, eyes that assessed you like a predator deciding if you were prey or competition. Major Keir, his voice was gravel, your reputation precedes you. Sir, the woman who exposed Blackwell made quite a scene from what I hear. I documented violations, sir. Captain Merrick made the scene by saluting me in front of the recruits. Wraith smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You think you're going to do the same here? Document violations. Build a case against me. Aloyne met his gaze steadily. I'm here to serve, sir, whatever that requires. We'll see. He gestured to a chair. Sit. She sat. Let me be clear about something. Wraith leaned back. I know what you are. I know about your little reform program. I know you're here to spy on my command and report back to Valor." Eloin said nothing. "Here's what you don't know," Wraith continued. "I don't particularly care because I haven't violated any regulations. My methods are aggressive, demanding, some would say harsh, but they're also legal, documented, approved." "Sir, I'm not finished," he cut her off. "You're going to be assigned to Bravo team. You'll deploy with them, train with them, and you're going to find that they're the most effective operators you've ever worked with. Because I don't produce soft warriors, I produce winners." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "One more thing, Major. If you're looking for another Blackwell situation, some instructor you can provoke into assaulting you so you can play the victim, you won't find it here. My people know better." Eloin stood as well. "With respect, sir, I'm not looking for anything. I'm here to do my job." "We'll see." As she left his office, Eloin felt the weight of what she'd undertaken. Wraith wasn't lying about the regulations. She'd studied his record. Everything he did technically fell within parameters. The brutality was carefully calibrated to stay just inside the lines. But there were different kinds of violations. Some broke written rules. Others broke people. Over the next weeks, Eloin embedded herself with Bravo team. They were good. Wraith hadn't lied about that. Skilled, disciplined, effective. But there was something else beneath the surface. A brittleness. These operators functioned beautifully under pressure because they'd been conditioned to fear failure more than death. They performed because the alternative was humiliation. During training exercises, she watched team leaders berate subordinates with surgical precision, finding pressure points, exploiting insecurities, never crossing into actionable harassment, always maintaining plausible deniability. "It's for their own good," one team leader explained when Eloin questioned the approach. "Combat is psychological. If they can't handle stress here, they'll break in the field." It was the same argument every toxic leader used, and it wasn't entirely wrong. Combat was psychological. Stress management mattered. But there was a difference between stress inoculation and systematic degradation. Eloin documented everything. The patterns of who got targeted, how corrections were delivered, the difference between constructive criticism and personal attacks. She built her case carefully, knowing it would need to be airtight. Then something unexpected happened. During a training exercise, one of the younger operators, a kid named Tors, made a mistake. Not a critical error, a timing issue, the kind of thing that happens when you're learning. The team leader's response was immediate and vicious. Personal attacks, public humiliation, the classic pattern. But Tors didn't break, didn't apologize, just stood there taking it. Afterward, Eloin found Tors alone. "You handled that well," she said. Tors looked at her cautiously. "You think so?" "I think you maintained your composure under unwarranted attack. That takes strength." "The lieutenant was right, though. I messed up the timing." "You did, but that deserved a tactical correction, not a personal assault on your character." Tors studied her face, trying to figure out if this was a trap. "Can I ask you something, Major?" Tors finally said. "Go ahead." "Do you think it has to be this way, the way they train us here?" It was the question Eloin had been waiting to hear. "No," she said simply, "I don't." "Then why does everyone act like it does? Like this is just how the military is?" "Because it's easier to accept than to change. Because people who succeeded under this system defend it. Because those in power benefit from it." Tors was quiet for a moment. "I almost quit last week," the young operator admitted. "Not because the physical stuff was too hard, I can handle that, but because I kept thinking, if this is what it means to be a good soldier, I don't know if I want to be one." "And why didn't you quit?" "Because I met a few people who seemed different, who led without cruelty, and I thought, maybe it doesn't have to be this way everywhere. Maybe if I stick it out, I can be one of those people someday." Eloine saw herself reflected in Tors, a younger version, someone who instinctively knew something was wrong but didn't yet have the framework to articulate it. "Can I tell you something?" Eloine said. Tors nodded. "There's a program for people like you, people who recognize that strength doesn't require cruelty, who want to change the culture from within. The reform thing, I've heard rumors. More than rumors, it's real, and it's looking for people who have what you just demonstrated." "What did I demonstrate?" "Moral courage," Eloine replied. "The willingness to question even when questioning is dangerous." Over the following months, Eloine recruited carefully. Not everyone, just those who showed the same instinct Tors had, the ones who excelled at their jobs but questioned the methods, who performed well but felt uneasy about the culture. One by one, she identified them, brought them into the program, created a network within Wraith's own command structure. It was slow work, dangerous work. There were setbacks. One recruit she'd been cultivating reported her to Wraith. The colonel called her in, confronted her with accusations of recruiting for an unauthorized program. Eloine had prepared for this. "Sir, I'm doing exactly what you asked. Serving. That includes mentoring junior operators. If my mentorship includes discussions about leadership philosophy, that's part of developing future commanders. Don't play word games with me, Major." "I'm not, sir. Everything I've done is documented and within my authority as a field-grade officer. I've recruited exactly 0 people for any unauthorized program. I've simply had conversations about leadership with operators who sought my advice." It was technically true. The actual recruitment happened through other channels, clean channels, channels that couldn't be traced back to her. Wraith couldn't prove anything, but he knew, and he started watching more carefully. That's when Eloine made her move. She requested a meeting with General Valor, official channels, documented. She submitted a formal report on command climate within the 7th Special Operations Group. The report was masterful. It didn't accuse Wraith of violations. Instead, it presented data, retention rates, mental health statistics, performance metrics, exit interview analysis. The numbers told a story. Wraith's units performed well in the short term, but they burned out operators at an unsustainable rate. They created tactical excellence but strategic weakness. More importantly, the report included testimonials, anonymous but verified, from operators who'd served under both traditional and reformed leadership models. The contrast was damning. "This is going to create waves," Valor warned when they met. "Good," Eloine replied. "We need waves. Wraith has allies, high-level allies. They'll fight this." "Let them fight. We have something they don't." "What's that?" "We have people who have experienced both systems, who can speak from direct knowledge, who can demonstrate that reform doesn't mean lowering standards. It means raising them in ways that actually matter." The battle that followed was bureaucratic, political, exhausting. Wraith fought back with his own reports, his own data, his own testimonials from operators who swore by his methods. But slowly, steadily, the tide shifted. Not because Eloine won every argument, but because she'd planted seeds throughout the system. Tors and others like him, Tahira, Dario, and Farron in their respective units, all of them documenting, reporting, building cases. One voice could be ignored, dismissed as an outlier, someone with an agenda. But dozens of voices, from different units, different commands, all telling similar stories. That was harder to dismiss. A year after Eloine first walked into Wraith's office, General Valor announced a pilot program, new leadership training protocols, revised instructor qualifications, enhanced oversight mechanisms. It wasn't everything Eloine wanted, but it was a start. Wraith was reassigned, not fired, not punished, simply moved to a position where his particular style was less influential. Tours got accepted into the reformed instructor training program, along with 17 others from various units. And Aloin, she received new orders. She was being assigned to the training command, not as an instructor, as the director of a new department, Leadership Development and Culture Reform. It was a made-up title, a new position created specifically for this program. But it was also real, with a budget, with staff, with authority to implement changes across the special operations community. The day she reported to her new office, she found a package waiting. Inside was a photograph, her father in his dress uniform, younger than she'd ever seen him. The inscription on the back was in his handwriting. True strength protects. She placed it on her desk where she'd see it every day. 5 years passed. The changes came slowly, too slowly for some, too fast for others. Some commanders embraced the reforms, others resisted. The culture war within special operations continued. But the numbers kept shifting. Retention rates improved. Mental health metrics got better. Performance remained high. In some units, it improved. Most importantly, a new generation of operators was emerging. People who'd learned that excellence didn't require cruelty, that you could maintain the highest standards while treating people with dignity. Tahira became an instructor herself, teaching leadership at the same facility where she'd first witnessed Aloin in that training yard. Dario took command of a team in Africa, running operations with a philosophy that emphasized trust over fear. Farron worked quietly in institutional reform, revising training protocols, updating regulations, making it harder for the next Blackwell or Wraith to hide behind technicalities. Tours became one of the most requested team leaders in special operations, not because he was soft, but because his teams performed better, communicated better, trusted each other in ways that made them more effective under pressure. And Aloin continued her work, expanding the program, training more observers, building more safeguards, slowly transforming the culture one decision at a time. She still faced resistance, still had battles to fight, still encountered commanders who swore the old ways were better. But she'd learned patience, learned that real change was measured in decades, not months, learned that every small victory mattered even when the larger war continued. On the anniversary of that day in the training yard, the day she'd let Blackwell push her face into the dirt, Aloin returned to Fort Drayson. The facility had changed, new commanders, new protocols, but the training yard looked the same. She stood there alone, remembering. The humiliation, the laughter, the moment when everyone was certain of their power, and the silence that followed when she proved them wrong. A young recruit approached hesitantly, probably wondering why a senior officer was standing alone in an empty training yard. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Aloin turned, saw herself reflected in this young person's face, someone at the beginning of their journey. "Tell me something," Aloin said. "How are they treating you here?" The recruit looked uncertain, trying to figure out if this was a trap. It's hard, ma'am, really hard, but..." The recruit paused. "But fair, demanding but fair." Aloin smiled. "Good, that's how it should be." As she walked away, she thought about her father, about Blackwell, about Wraith, about all the people who'd believed that breaking people was the only way to make them strong. They'd been wrong. Strength wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about grinding people into the dirt. Real strength was about knowing when to yield and when to stand firm, about appearing weak while gathering power, about patience and purpose and choosing your moments carefully. Real strength was about protecting people, not breaking them. Her father had understood that, had tried to change the system, had paid a price for it. But his work hadn't died with him. It had lived on through her, through the program she'd built, through every operator who chose dignity over cruelty. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones no one sees coming. The ones who kneel in the dirt and wait for the perfect moment to rise. The ones who understand that true victory isn't about winning a single battle. It's about changing the war itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.